Recipes for Grief, heartfelt storytelling for feely foodies. Today's guest is my friend and mentor, Carmen Spagnola. We covered so much here. I actually took notes while editing this episode. A couple things I wish we had more time for includes growing and cooking with medicinal plants, as well as accessibility and privilege around eating fresh and local foods. There's a couple terms here that I want to speak on before you hear the episode, the first of which is dark night of the soul. Its first known usage, at least for me, is from St. John of the Cross. It's also been used by Mother Teresa and Joseph Campbell. It sounds like exactly what it is, considered perhaps a spiritual dryness or a sense of withdrawal of God's presence, or to put it straight, really hard times. We also speak about collapse. Carmen has a great deal of content on IG, her website, as well as her podcast about this topic. And more generally, you can think of collapse as some of the things we've really been experiencing since COVID came into our awareness, but these things are certainly not limited to the past few years. Shortages of food and goods, chaotic weather patterns that have serious downstream effects, economic turns, as well as mass death that included or didn't include proper grieving rituals, and in many places did include things like mass burials, estrangement from loved ones' bodies, and each other during our grieving processes. If you're someone who's noticed how deeply you've been affected by these things, or you may feel an impending doom on the horizon, well, you're in good company. And I definitely recommend diving down the rabbit hole of collapse awareness and preparedness that Carmen offers on her various platforms. Lastly, I want to give you a heads up that the sound quality of this episode is not as clear as I would have preferred. It actually reminds me of when I was a kid and my grandmother would go to bed at 8 p.m. and I would be up hours later trying to watch David Letterman with the volume on the lowest possible setting so I wouldn't wake her. But watching David Letterman was still worth it for me. I hope you feel the same about this podcast, that the alchemy of the conversation we had is worth your effort in attuning your ear to hear clearly. Carmen Spagnola is a Cordon Bleu-trained chef turned trauma recovery practitioner, clinical hypnotherapist, and kitchen witch. She is author of The Spirited Kitchen, Recipes and Rituals for the Wheel of the Year, host of the Numinous Podcast, and founder of the Numinous Network, an online learning and support portal for people healing from trauma through a cross-pollination of somatics, attachment, and nature-based spirituality. As a chef, author, and facilitator, Carmen holds space for renewal amidst turmoil. Her work is an invitation to re-enchantment, soul nourishment, and a deeper and more animistic relationship to the natural world. She provides frameworks and skills to create cultures of collective care in precarious times. Carmen, how have you been sleeping recently?
You know, that Saturn in Pisces transit, I started dreaming about whales and whales with some kind of educational component adjacent to it. So my dream life has been so active, very Neptunian. Everything's very, and like almost to a literal degree. I think the very first day, the first night, that transit, I was dreaming that my husband Ruben and I were teaching, and we were like holding space, and it was kind of like we were doing quests, but in a different place than we normally lead it. So not out on the mountain, but like around the ocean. So it had that very Saturnian, like kind of strict parent holding the space, like, we're teaching you, but also you have to be careful and know the limits. And then here were these whales and this oceanic depth, and we were like trying to make sure people weren't basically getting swept under by these humpback whales. So that was like the first, and I woke up just being like, wow, that's wild. It actually almost reminded me of in the very beginning of the pandemic, like January, February, March of 2020, I dreamt a lot about, herds of horses getting away and people not listening to me when I was trying to tell them not to get on the horses. It was like herding cats. Really, it was a lot of anxiety dreams about trying to get people to listen to me while wild things were getting away from us. So this kind of reminded me of the thing, that it was like, whoa, this massive, these whales, if we were to say, they kind of represent the unconscious or the collective unconscious, or a plumbing the depths of wisdom. These just massive beings, and like me and Ruben trying to like get people to just like listen and be careful. Like, okay, so that was the very first night. And since then, I've dreamt about water every night. Another one, I think the next night was, we were in a school. So we weren't teaching, but it was an abandoned school, and it was flooding. And it was like the dark, where they have the emergency lights that are kind of strobing. And we were trying to find people in this flood. And then another oceanic dream last night. What was so interesting, I keep dreaming about humpbacks. We just came back from a quick trip over to Port Townsend, where we take the ferry between Victoria and Port Townsend. When we came back, a humpback breached 3 times, first very close to the boat, clearly being like, look at me, and then 2 more times, which we saw. So my dream life has been very aquatic and big. There's like a quality of mass and slowness and needing to be cautious. And then interesting how it's, there's been that augury or those signs in my waking life too, of it mirroring each other and feeling like these great beings are going, hey, look over here. Yeah. But what are they trying to say to me, Andrea? What does it mean?
That's exactly what I was about to ask you. Have you made any meaning of this yet?
Well, I don't want to turn it too dark too early, but I do think that
let's go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the converging emergencies of large-scale cooperation dilemmas all coming together, I think there's just, we're not going to be able to keep bracing against collapse in the same way that we have. And I think in many ways, the pandemic has rendered us more fragile in a lot of our systems. And even though we keep functioning and hey, when we were traveling, there wasn't a single mask on the ferry, I don't think. Wow. We sat outside so that we could stay COVID safe. But, the world, the economy is continuing as though we haven't just suffered a mass disabling event. But I think the next few years, things are going to really start to land. And I think people, particularly economically, and just with our bandwidth, our energy, even if it's not COVID related, I think we're just going to see a lot more people with, adrenal fatigue, burnout, just way less capacity. And I think that what we know is that as soon as we all have to slow down because we just can't push through anymore, we're confronted with grief and mortality and loss. And that gets us very reflective. And so I think the oceanic quality is that the collective consciousness is, it's pretty thin right now. It's like people, there's a lot of weight, and we need to go deeper. And I think things that I've been talking about and teaching about for a long time, I think I'm going to have to go slower and maybe just repeat myself, like I think I might just need to not be trying to be generative or adding new things. Yeah. Not a lot of air quality. I don't need to learn more things. I don't need to task more. I think I need to just stay slow and stay with where people are at, which is lots of big feelings and trying to tap into the depth, what is the wisdom or the meaning that they can cultivate that keeps them going when they can't stay on the treadmill anymore. I think that's what these are auguring. I think this is what they're foreshadowing. Just keep going slower, stay with the feeling, stay with the emotion, and don't feel like I need to add more to the repertoire for a while.
Yeah. Stay with the feelings. I'm so glad you brought up your dreams, because I've just been noticing in my little corner of the world, everyone is kind of going through a lot. And if it's not them, it's someone close to them. Just all these different things of innumerable options. And grief is just showing up in so many ways. So yeah, I'll meet you at the waterfront.
Exactly. That's so funny you say that, because I used to say when I would meet people for one-on-ones and we'd see if it was a good fit, I'd say, okay, so before we go any further, let's both check in with how we're arriving. And it's kind of like, if we look at the water line, you and I are standing at the ocean, Andrea, we're looking at the ocean and we're like, then looking at each other and going, do you want to go in? Like, I don't know, maybe. It depends what's in there. If it's just, seaweed and like, mini fish, like sure. But if we dive in and it's like whale shark, I don't want to go in. So let's just lower the water line a little by noticing and naming, what am I bringing? What's below the surface? What is there that you can't see, but that I'm carrying right now? Because as you said, we're all just carrying so much invisibly. We really are just doing the best we can. And I know we could look at public figures that are like, some of them are really despicable, and it's hard to imagine that that's the best they can do. But actually, they're just traumatized little mammals who are just being shitty, and that is the best they can do, So I don't know. Not that that doesn't necessarily build my compassion for them, but it helps me get very real very quickly about what we're contending with.
That's right.
So let's just notice a name. What are we bringing? And it's a lot of weight, a lot of grief.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of grief, Earth Day is coming up. And, I want to go so many different places with you on this. So we'll see where we go and we'll see how far we get. You publicly identify as an animist. I do as well, maybe less publicly, but until now. So, an animist is someone who believes that all the things, the plants, the animals, the more than human, all of it have like an essence. How do you relate with the living world differently now that you're like, yes, I'm an animist, this is what I believe, to perhaps before you came to this place?
I kind of think that most people are born animists. So I would say I, like most people, was born an animist. And it's more like that got educated out of me. And particularly there was a period from, I'm going to say like emergent adulthood to my 30s. It's just a survival period. You're learning how to leave home, survive under capitalism, try to find someone to kind of hitch yourself to survive. And so there were a lot of years, 20 years in there until maybe I was almost 40, where I didn't tend those relationships with the other than human. And in that time, again, I give myself a lot of rope here because I was in survival mode, experiencing the world. But I think I was mainly just, certainly spiritually a less interesting person. I was less creative, less imaginative, less attuned. I was more anxious then. I was more lonely more often. Yeah, the troughs, right? Like being a human is really about navigating those exhilarating highs and those terrifying and like terribly lonely lows. And there were just more of those, and there were more extremes. But then, after maybe a little before I turned that, maybe about the last 10 years, but certainly since I turned 40, I'm 47 now, those relationships were tended and cultivated again more. And I really did start to proceed as though, the crow was pretty excited to track me as much as I was tracking it, and that there's an awareness there that I could participate in, this participatory universe. And those relationships are so, I don't know, they're just like really, not just delightful, but they help me locate myself, that I am an animal. I like being an animal. I like being a little mammal on this planet. I'm not a misanthrope that I think, humans are a scourge or anything like that. I think we're pretty cool little animals. And I like that sense of belonging. So I cherish it a lot more now because I'm tending it. It does feel like I receive a lot of the blessings of the other beings, and I can communicate, whether that's with my dog or a stranger's dog or with the crocuses when they come out. It really does feel like, oh, I'm excited to be in the world, and the world is excited to host me.
Oh, I just love that so much, that sense of belonging. Yeah. I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit more about that, the relationship, like the importance of right relationship. You recently published a beautiful cookbook, The Spirited Kitchen, Recipes and Rituals for the Wheel of the Year. And throughout the book, there are rituals and spellcrafting, notes on foraging, symbology, of course, the actual recipes. And so what is it about relationship, especially like around foraging and, taking from the earth? Can you just speak to a little bit more about that?
Well, I don't know if I am in right relationship with the earth. I only know that I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be on my way to right relationship. But I think as a human being, I'm always going to be taking more than my fair share. And so I'm always a little bit behind in that sense of belonging. It's a difficult thing. And much of what I've learned about being in right relationship has only come through a lot of study of supremacy culture and recognizing my human supremacy tendencies. And so everything I've learned about diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion absolutely maps onto the tendency of my taking as a human, more that I'm offering and giving, or more that I'm giving up, more than it's like learning how to track fairness through the lens of power and rank is a lifelong skill. And so it's very important to me to do it, even though I know that I will never be able to balance the scale. I will never be able to go to some mystic right relationship place where I'm not doing harm or where I'm not taking more than my share. But it's very important to me to undertake the effort to do so. And everything about that reciprocity and mutuality, I think, has only been enhanced as I've done the same in my human relationships, and then again kind of mapped it onto my relationship with my dog or my son's cat or my neighbor or the trees outside, or how much of the land we rent land but we garden on it. Well, how much do I put in flowers that are not of this place versus reintegrate and reintroduce native plants. There's no pristine prior state, and recognizing that, in my marriage, I feel like I'm on my fourth or fifth marriage to the same human. We've changed so much. Yeah. And I anticipate that it'll be the same in my relationship with the earth. And that, as my body gets older, as I hopefully live a long life and hopefully get really old and slow moving like a rock, I think I'll just keep spending more time identifying with different beings. There was a period in my life where I really identified with birds of prey, but all kinds of birds. And then I went through a period where it was very much fair energy, wolf energy, things that were like fairly strong, alpha type species. And then I, started to be like, maybe I'm more like this. Maybe crocuses, maybe roses. I tend to go towards like the charismatic things. But I started to get to know nettles a little more. And I was like, oh, I'm a nettle. Like, I don't like them because they're so like me. That's what it is. I wish I was rose, but I'm actually nettle. And so then I had to develop appreciation for nettle. And nettle really blessed me. You know, nettle had been trying to say for a long time, like, over here, like, come here. We are your people. And it took me a long time to be able to just accept nettle are my people. And maybe as I get older, there'll be different trees than just sequoias and cedars and like big charismatic things. Maybe I'll be like, oh, turns out I'm the other thing that I've oft overlooked. You know, I'm the wow or something, you know. But maybe then by the time I get very old, I'll realize like, oh, I'm on my way to soil. And now I'm related to soil. You know, I think that is what right relationship is to me, is allowing the relationship I have with the earth to grow and evolve and to change me and help me see who I really am more and more.
Yeah. One of my college professors, Dr. Weinstock, told us, me and my wife have been married for 50 years and we've had 5 or 6 spouses. And just hearing that as a young person, it's like, oh, okay, like I'm going to change, you're going to change. And what he said was the key to the longevity of our marriage is making sure that who I turn into and who they turn into are still compatible. Right. So that's just always been like a guiding light in all of my relationships, not just romantic. Just, are we still compatible?
Yes. I really have so much love for the word compatible and compatibility and for this concept. And I don't lack any love. I have no hate for incompatibility. I just feel like, gosh, incompatibility has to be one of the best ways you can discover that you shouldn't be with this person. It's like the gentlest way, I hope, that you can discover that, like, maybe we shouldn't proceed. Yeah, but I like that idea. Are you growing together? Are you growing apart?
In your book, you write, I'm going to quote you now, I can't talk about food without talking about systemic oppression. And I can't talk about spirituality without naming collective grief and trauma. My magic and my cooking serve an underlying commitment to truth, justice, spirit, and healing. Okay, this is a really wide berth that I think we could do like a whole series on. But if you could just in this moment expound on, you know, how does your cooking serve, right? I think so many of us just we either go like, I'm a foodie or I'm just eating to nourish my body. And so like, where's those commitments come into your relationship with food and with cooking and with growing your own food?
Oh yeah, food is very, I'm going to say political. It's a radical act, I think, to harness the means of your subsistence. And be able to say, like, this is my provender. That's a very important source of my identity and my strength and my meaningfulness and my focus in life. When I think about how we eat at our household, it's, you know, we don't have a lot of range. Like, I can go for a long time without leaving the house. You know, I don't have to do a ton of grocery shopping. And just for people's perspective, like, I live in the city. We rent a city lot. It's got a north-facing yard, so not even great for growing. You know, it's pretty big for the city, but the part that we garden on is like, I don't know what it is, 15 by 15, something like that. And then we have all these little side beds. And we just, if you add it all up, it's, you know, it's that same amount again of footprint. And we just happen to live in the California of Canada, meaning the mildest place you can in Canada. And so we do a lot of 4-season gardening. We also eat seasonally. So our dear friends, J.B. McKinnon and Elisa Smith, wrote the book, The 100-Mile Diet. And that way of eating really appealed to my husband, Ruben, because his background is in sustainability. And I had gone to cooking school in France where, you know, in the 90s, you would hear about slow food movement. It was just starting to become a thing in North America. It was a thing very much still in like Italy and France. And so I went to cooking school in France in the 90s, and the slow food movement was not as romanticized maybe here because they have such a like unbroken lineage. It almost seemed as like farm to table eating. But on the heels of the 80s, where food had gotten very vertical and gastromolecular cuisine was like a whole thing, this was a renaissance. So the life we live now just kind of works on those principles of eating what's there. So we don't really eat tomatoes out of season very much unless we happen to come in, or, you know, my kiddo is like really craving them for snacks or something like that. But like, we just don't. We grow what we can it, we preserve it, and then that's what we're eating. And to me, that helps me stay connected to what I mentioned before, like unhooking from human supremacy, where I can just get a hot house pepper anytime I want, whenever I want. I can get avocados from wherever. It's just like, those are treats to us. Yeah. You know, those are things that are very special. And again, you know, when I talk about collabs, one of the ways we approach that is that we try to live more and more today as we anticipate the ones who come after us will be living in 150 or 200 years. And that will probably be much more similar to how we lived 200 years That's ago. Right. And so, yeah. You know, I don't know. I loved Little House on the Prairie as a kid, those books, right? So that way of living and eating feels biologically right to me. And it feels like a moral imperative. I feel compelled to live that way. And, you know, fewer food miles, local farmers, you know, not exploiting people, not sending stuff all over the world. Like, it just feels like the right way to live for me.
Mm-hmm. I have actually had dreams about your garden. Actually, I just need to say that out loud. I have dreamed about your garden. You know, I've only seen it like on Instagram and TikTok, but
I hope it's got a lot of weeds all the time. It's always got chickweed in our garden.
Oh, goody. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, like the rest of us, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, you know, you and Ruben have this hashtag, the small and delicious life, or hashtag small and delicious life. Know that. Mm-hmm. And for someone who has not been to your house, has not, you know, put my hands in your soil, your garden seems endless. And, you know, you grow a lot of different varieties of things, you know, varieties of roses. I don't even know. Do you have any idea how many individual things you grow at any given time?
Well, one time I just tried to do the flowers and medicinal plants. And once I got over like 250, I was like, right.
Yeah.
This is,
yeah. So even though it's a small and delicious life, it is filled with variety and diversity. Can you speak to the importance of that in your life? Like, you know, you hear these statistics like, I don't know about Canadians, but most Americans just eat the same 15 things week after week after week. You find what you like, you eat it, and that's just kind of the end of it.
Right. You know, it's funny. Okay, so I see both sides of this, right? Like, yes, okay, it looks like we have a lot of stuff. I suppose, factually, on the face of it, maybe we do have a lot of stuff. But when I really think about what we're eating day in, day out, like a lot of the years, I'll tell you what we eat, Andrea. This is what we eat most of the time, 70, 80% of the time. We eat a piece of meat with a vegetable and potatoes. The meat is lightly seasoned with an herb of some kind, usually rosemary, or if it's fish, it's going to be dill or something. But it's a lightly seasoned, really good, local, high quality protein. The vegetable has generally come either from our garden or a neighbor's garden or within, 10 kilometers of here, 5 miles. And that vegetable has butter and salt, sometimes a little citrus. And then there's like a vegetable or, a pulse, a legume, but usually it's going to be a potato. And that potato is going to have butter and salt. I'm telling you, it's like not that fancy. It's just that when you eat such good quality food, it doesn't require very much seasoned and you don't need very much of it. You don't have to do anything to it. You don't have to turn it into anything. And so we're just really eating out of the garden. There's a huge part of the year where our vegetable is going to be either a kale stalk or a broccoli or a turnip or a radish or cabbage. Like that is like a big part of the year, but it's going to be really flavorsome. And, then, if I sit and think about it, okay, so we eat very seasonally. There are certain times of year where I'm like, okay, the forsythia comes out and I'm like, ooh, nettle quiche. I want quiche, and suddenly we're eating quiches. And then summertime, it's like, oh my gosh, the cucumbers are on and the tomatoes are on and, Reuben's bread, we're not eating as much of it. So we're having panzanella and we're having Greek salad. Mm-hmm. We are eating salad. That is like what we are doing, and roast chicken with calendula and butter, that's it. And then fall hits, suddenly there's a chill, I need a sweater, and I'm like, cassoulet. And suddenly we add cassoulet, so I have these things that just feel traditional for me, that are very like weather dependent, and it's not just ingredients, but it's like temperature and what makes us comfortable and how long the days are. How we're having a lot more small meals during the day in summer with like something bigger at night, whereas in the wintertime I very often have more of a bigger meal in midday, and so I don't know. Yes, I guess we do eat a lot of different things. It's pretty varied in a way. But then again, it's like a scavenger hunt through the year, right? You're like, oh gosh, the violets are out. I need to make some violet syrup. And like now I want to make a pound cake so I can put the violet syrup on it. And, some other time of year where it's like, oh gosh, our strawberries are finally here. This is like this narrow window where we're going to get strawberries. What are we going to do? Okay, I'm going to make tarts and we're going to, and then we have so many raspberries. My God, the raspberries never stop. So there's a whole big season where it's like, but you got to take advantage of it because you're not getting raspberries the whole rest of the year, really, except for what we were canning and putting up and preserving. But, that's how we're doing it. We're preserving the surplus through freezing and canning and fermenting, and then we're just kind of eating what's there. And in a way, it doesn't feel that interesting because it's like meat and potatoes and veg,
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah. But what I first just want to say is I'm hearing that relationship again, right? Like you're noticing what's happening in the land that surrounds your home, and you get excited about it. We've lived in our home for about 5 years. I have not had much luck growing food, but I do grow flowers. Anyone who knows me well knows that this is a never ending, excitement of, oh my gosh, my daffodils have come up for the first time. Oh my God, this is so amazing. But yeah, I have a very small little container of strawberries, and they made it through the winter. I guess I'll get fruit. I don't know yet, but I'm really excited. And I'm, tending to my little strawberry pot. I talk to it.
I love that.
Yeah. So I just wanted to mark that relationship again of like, yes, we can have strawberries in November if we go to the grocery store. But when you're growing them and then you're excited for them, I'm thinking about, I don't know, I feel like I might've heard this from you, but that saying, all a child really needs is for their parents' eyes to light up when they walk into a room. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm thinking about with your garden. Like you're just so happy to see everyone when they come up.
That is 100% it. I had such an intense, almost just devoted relationship with a pumpkin that I grew last year.
Oh yes, the pumpkin.
The pumpkin. And I really did feel like the pumpkin was like, I love you, Carmen. And it was like, it was like John Cusack holding the radio over his head, like it was just like, I love you. And every time I go, I'd be like, wow, the pumpkin is really giving everything for me. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to, in return, take care of that pumpkin. That's right. That's the most beautiful part when you think about a reciprocal relationship, when you actually can sense that something is like that nature is giving you jazz hands. Mm-hmm. You're like, look what I can do.
Jazz hands.
You're like, yeah.
Oh my goodness. So we are going to come back to grief, but you brought up your kale. and we don't need to get too much into it. It is on your podcast, unless you really are called to speak on this right now. Your dark night of the soul experience in 2008. And then you found in your town a little patch of kale and parsnips and potatoes. And that's who kind of brought you home, or brought you home to yourself, perhaps. I don't ever tire of hearing that story, but I want to quote you again, because there's something else you speak about that I feel is very timely. You write in your book, quote, people dealing with traumatic experiences, like, let's say, surviving a pandemic during late stage racialized capitalism, tend to have a very sensitive nervous system. People who have sensitive nervous systems are often highly intuitive. People who are highly intuitive are immeasurably renewed and strengthened through attunement, careful noticing, and coming into resonance to the hopefulness inherent in the season's cycles. They provide a container in which to manage the chaos again and again. You don't need to have a garden to remember this. It's a pathway to personal healing and communal care. Yes. Please, I quote you constantly about this. Can you just speak more to how the cycles of nature supports our human nervous systems, especially just, again, with everything happening, and that will continue to happen as your dream has foretold?
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things that the nervous system can do is, when it's faced with something really big problems, big feelings, good or bad, we can be overwhelmed with somebody expressing kindness or love or generosity to us, but we can also be overwhelmed with people expressing cruelty. But one of the things the nervous system can do is, when there is enough safeness and we are confronted with something big and overwhelming that is beautiful, is that our nervous system will flip into this pro-social gear. So pro-social meaning a desire to collaborate with and cooperate with this larger thing. And so sometimes we call that awe or enchantment or wonder. But just when we're describing, like, oh my gosh, the crocuses have come out, and the crocuses to me represent, emergence from the underworld and Persephone's myth. And like, I have all the story about it, but also I'm having a mirror neuron event when I'm so delighted to see the crocus. And it's amplified when I sense that the crocus is giving me jazz hands, it's showing off for me.
That's right.
What the nervous system and the brain will then do is trigger this pro-social impulse within me, where I want to collaborate with the crocus and the imminence, the energy coming forth from it. And I want to not only cooperate with it, but protect it. And so there's something about becoming enfolded in this larger, greater thing, whether the larger, greater thing is springtime and a sense of re-emergence from a long, dark winter, or whether that enfoldment is in the sunshine beating down on my garden or the scent of the rose. There's something about it that triggers this cascade of hormones in my body, of, neural connections that say, yes, I belong, or I want to participate in this, or I'll have more of that, please. How can I participate? And at some point, sometimes we even also want to sacrifice ourselves for that. And I think this is, we can think about Earth Day, right? The idea of the environmental movement was people need to care. We need to educate them about what's going on, and they'll care about the earth and they'll want to protect it. Unfortunately, we don't have a mirror neuron event with somebody at, giving away recycled plastic shopping bags as an Earth Day promo at the grocery store, right? That is not an unfoldment into awe or some greater thing. You actually do have to have the experience of attention and attunement to what is happening outside your door, and to track it over time, and to feel yourself a part of it, to feel yourself beloved, And so when we track the seasons and the cycles, and we notice how everything grows and flourishes, flushes, and then decays, and then dies. We get to have that little completion, a little cycle ourselves. And that's what we're trying to do with stress, is we're trying to go through little cycles and have little completions and not get stuck in any one part of the stress cycle. And so when we're attuning to nature and we see it going through those cycles, when we're really paying attention, something can happen where we have that mirror neuron event, and somewhere along the way, we kind of get enfolded into the process and feel ourselves as part of it. And not only that, but that we want to protect it. We want to ensure its dignity. We want to treat it reverently. And when we find ourselves as part of that, that enfoldment makes ourselves part of nature. It helps us feel that our own renewal is potentially there, or our own graceful decline, or our own, whatever our end is going to be, that we will be part of some larger process that we are protected in, or that we belong in. So I think seeing wherever you go, the seasons are going to be different. You know, the equator, maybe they only have 2 seasons. And in Finland, say maybe seasons don't resonate with all the listeners, but cycles certainly do. And so when we can really track and give our attention to the cycles around us, at a certain point, our brains, our bodies will kind of kick into that fear where we allow ourselves to be enfolded in something greater. And we feel that pro-social impulse to want to participate with it. And that therein lies our own renewal.
I just love the word pro-social. Right?
It's a good one. Hey, it's like, oh yeah, that's a thing that can happen.
That's
that
right.
exists.
Yeah. Like, you know, we might joke how we're antisocial, but where are we pro-social?
Yeah.
Where do we belong? Where do we fit in? And what relationships are we nurturing and are nurturing us back?
Yeah. And what triggers our desire to like both revere and love, but also protect and collaborate and sacrifice the self for, you know, like there's something in psychology called the reciprocity problem. And there's been tons of studies about it, about how like we will be kind to people because humans are fundamentally kind and compassionate and generous, but we'll do that up to a certain point. At a certain point, we do want reciprocity. We do expect, we're not going to keep giving and giving and giving and get nothing back, except when we feel the pro-social impulse and we get enfolded in the greater thing. Wow. Then we're like, I'm little and this is so big, but it's this bigger thing is so much more important than any one person. And I'm willing to sacrifice, or I'm willing to give something up. And so this is why I tie that into the environmental movement, right? It's like, what are we willing to give up? How are we willing to be smaller and let nature have more? Where are we willing to take less than we could? You know, that's the pro-social impulse.
So I just want to repeat that question and just leave a little space around it for people to feel what this feels like in their bodies. What comes up when you hear the question, what are you willing to give up? Okay. And that's a very generous question because I believe in my lifetime, I'm just a couple years younger than you. So like in my lifetime, I'm pretty certain we're not going to have a choice. We're going to be giving up all kinds of shit that we didn't want to give up. So, you know, you might want to get comfortable with that question so that when it comes up, you know how to navigate that loss and you can grieve it. You know, is Earth Day griefful for you?
No, you know, Earth Day isn't important to me. You know,
tell us more.
Earth Day to me is a cautionary tale. You know, that humans, we will just keep doing stuff even when we know it doesn't work. It soothes something else. It soothes the anxiety, and it means that we can spend a whole bunch of our time and energy looking as though we're trying. Nobody could say that we didn't. You know, I'm more of a like fail early and recover quickly kind of person. So, Earth Day's been around a long time. If that kind of education campaign, or I don't know even what it is anymore. It used to be an awareness campaign. I actually do happen to know one of the founders. And, he would say it was a massive failure. And it's really a relief, actually, to hear somebody say that. It's like, yeah, if it was going to work, it would have worked by now. Mm-hmm. So what is the purpose of it? And anything that is an awareness campaign or an education campaign is an old paradigm. I mean, the myth of we just need more education. I mean, if the internet doesn't disprove that, I don't know what else.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
I feel the need to jump out of my chair and clap right now.
Right? I know, it's so obvious. But it's also not a griefful day in the sense that I understand that people, the IPCC report comes out, or every Thursday we have these kind of retrospectives of so how bad is it now kind of articles, and we only have this much time. And those things don't make me sad so much anymore. I think because my worldview around climate change is so coherent. It just makes sense to me what has happened, what is happening, and therefore what is likely going to happen. And also because I incorporate an understanding of trauma and how it lives in the body and how it affects our behavior and our relationships and our ability to choose. I just see it as a very large body of humans, a very large collective that's in a functional freeze. And that's really, functional freeze is not a bad thing. It's actually the best option when there are no options, right? And so, again, we're all just little mammals doing the best we can. Yeah. I think of Earth Day as an opportunity to reflect on the poignance of finding ourselves where we are. And as you know, poignance is, I have a soft spot. Poignance. If we marry beauty and pain together, I'm there and I'm oh, make it hurt so good. Yeah. That's such a, I don't know if it's uniquely human, but it is such a precious part of being human, is being able to experience the tension of beauty and pain, kissing up to each other. And so Earth Day is just another very poignant moment for me, but I don't feel grieful necessarily.
Mm-hmm. How do you navigate poignancy? Physically, do you walk it out? Do you garden? Do you weed pull it?
I do a lot of squinching and squinching and scrunching first. It makes me grip my midline. I grip my chest. I'm I grip the collar of my sweater. I have to hold myself. I hold my face a lot. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of hands on my cheeks and just shaking my head and I do a lot of clasping. I'm like a fucking Victorian or something.
I was gonna say, you're kind of reminding me of my grandmother right now.
Actually, oh my heavens! I do a lot of sort of grasping hand on chin and shaking my head and eyebrows up, puppy dog, and just oh, I love you. Oh, I love you so much. I do a lot of gasping, and then and then I find myself okay, I've been gripping the midline for too long, and I need to get up. I usually have a shower. I need warmth and water to help that move, or a bath. I guess I'm a fixed water sign, so that kind of thing works really well for me. Hot water bottle, anything that's gonna soften and soothe. I also love a good cry. I'm a good crier. Mm-hmm. Anything like that has that sort of bittersweetness, aching, heartache. That's sort of my jam. And I just try to keep breathing. And I try not to be too fixed in my stare. I can get pretty fixed in my eyes when I'm tracking something really strong and leaning forward into it. Sometimes when I'm watching TV, if I'm seeing something, I see myself kind of leaning forward, eyes really like tracking this thing and just crying, my eyes open. And then I go like, okay, I need to bring on my back. I need to bring on my arms and legs. I need to stop gripping. I need to let it, like the salt water flow a little bit here. Yeah.
Well, speaking of letting the salt water flow, and I can't remember if I asked you this on your podcast, but as someone who I would identify as a feely foodie, can you tell us a time that you've been moved to tears regarding food or plant or, the more than human?
Well, I just had kind of like a whole bunch of like the Marcel Proust or the end of Ratatouille, where the images really fast to the olfactory memory. Usually I have to say it's less in the eating, and when I move to tears, it's more in the craft, like either in the cooking of something or the harvesting of something. I really love craft. I love seeing that alchemy of skill and intuition come together. I know that I've toured wineries and, talked to winemakers and seen people who are like really into their compost. And I've had lots of very moving moments around that sort of thing. I think that, recently, this wasn't so much around food, but I started crying in a course I'm taking with Michael Marriott, who was the head gardener for David Austin Roses for 35 years. And he was teaching about how David Austin came to create what we now think of as English heritage roses. And that made me cry. I think people who are doing anything with that kind of commitment, that's strong for me. But I think maybe the last time I cried over like actual food, I'm thinking of nettles a lot today. I'm thinking of, I did a really great nettle harvest, and, it wasn't an easy relationship with nettles. They just seemed a little hokey or something. I don't know. They seemed like, I don't know, a witch cliche or something, and too astringent. But over the years, it's just become so sweet to me, how they grow and how prolific they are in the yard and when they reappear. And I had this great harvest last year, and then did like a very quick saute, and I think they went into a quiche. And it just, as I was making them, I had this sense that I was making I cry again now, the people in my family who'd had to live really close to the bone and who had to, there's been family members, my aunts, my grandma even still talked about this, about being so poor that they put down a horse. The family lived eating the horse that whole winter. And there's something about finding resource and resilience in making do with what you have and turning something that is so harsh into a story of survival and caretaking for the people you care about, and doing your best to survive in a healthful way, and all of that. Those sacrifices really do mean something to me. And so it matters that even though I can go down to the grocery store and I can go, I could buy a head of spinach and let half of it go bad in my crisper or whatever, as I did when I was a younger person.
Yeah.
It actually matters to me as a way to honor all of those who scrounged and, had very lean springs, that I learn how to work with nettles and learn to love the flavors or make them work for me. And I'm really lucky I'm not having to eat a beloved giant ally,
Yeah.
And those things are really precious to me. I cry every time we slaughter a rabbit, those things are really important to me to kind of recognize I think a lot of the pent up intergenerational trauma and stress kind of comes out when I have those moments of like, I don't have to eat this way, but I choose to, and I really like it, and it's delicious, and I make it good, and I make it beautiful, and it feels like a very healing act of repair and ancestral veneration and reverence.
Thank you for sharing that story about the horse. That must have been really hard for them.
Oh yeah, and so much shame for people who, my great grandpa John Graham was like a horse whisperer, and they worked with Highland ponies and came over to Alberta, and the stories of just how hard it was as a new Canadian for a couple generations, and the Dust Bowl, and not being able to feed your animals. There's so much shame still. I mean, it's still talked about in hushed tones by my aunt, but they had to put down. Like, it's just like so much shame, so much pain. Yeah, very difficult.
Yeah. Would you be willing to speak on why it's important for you to do this type of ancestral care and the healing of that intergenerational trauma?
Well, I mean, we're all downstream from a couple of world wars and lots of mass immigration and migration and intercontinental slave trade, like there's just all these different ways in which, we were talked about this a bit earlier, but like those hens are coming home to roost. And, for folks who like things a little more rational, like science tells us that we don't have to have experienced those traumas to carry them in our body. And what we also know is that if we don't have some ways to grapple with the stress of those things, and really what is stress is like unresolved emotion, like it's grief with nowhere to put it, or it's powerlessness, or it's anger, or these different emotions that don't have anywhere to go. If we don't grapple with those and find some outlets for them, they somatize, they become illness, they become, autoimmunity, they become fatigue, they somatize. Something comes up. Illness doesn't come from nowhere. It's a very slow process. And so I think it's important that just even the collapsnik in me is like your health is your number one asset in any kind of collapse scenario. So anything I can do to grapple with that, I'm going to do. So there's the benefits of it. I'm just like, there's an imperative. There's a health imperative. There's also a legacy imperative. Like, I want to deal with it so that my kid, who's already this little queer, anxious artist, doesn't have more to deal with, because I haven't made our lineage, I haven't gotten current with our lineage. I haven't gotten up to date. And where are we in our relationship with our past? And so there's kind of like some very material and tangible and physical realities that I'm contending with when I'm doing ancestral veneration, is that I'm trying to get current. It's really important to be up to date in all our relationships, and that includes with our dead. I do find that coming from a long line of gardeners, both like flowers and veggies and all of that, and a very long line of animal husbandry, excellence in animal husbandry, it's very important for me to create the conditions where the post-traumatic growth presents itself. So, it's a cliche because it's true that if we can inherit trauma, we can also inherit strength.
That's right.
And so there are latent skills. There's, intuitive knowledge. There's all these different ways in which the blessings of my lineage want to appear. And so I need to show up and make myself available and be amenable to that. And so I do my best. That means that I have to let go of perfectionism. I have to let go of capitalist, comparison. I have to let go of filling all of my time with generativity and productivity. I need to create spaciousness so that the gifts of my lineage can be revealed, and I can help nurture them. And that's what we call talent, right? Like there are the gifts that you come in with, and I like hope that I can make myself available. But then there's the talent that it's like, okay, there's a kernel of something here, and I could hone it, I could refine it, and that would make my family proud. And my family isn't necessarily, or in my case, it's not the ones who are living, it's the ones who are dead. It's my ancestors. So that relationship has sustained me, even when the relationships with my living family have been strained or, cut off. Those relationships with my ancestors have helped remind me who I really am. They've helped me remember the character of my lineage when my most recent experiences with some of my family members has like not been a net positive, I would say. And so it's sort of distorted and tainted my sense of the character of my lineage and therefore who I was. So being able to like connect with ancestors and honor them by, honing some of those interests that I had that it turns out I share with, a couple generations ago, that has been very clarifying about who I am in this life and unburdened by the trauma that I experienced with, immediate family members growing up. And it's like I was able to sort of take that filter off and get more in touch with the true nature of what my blessings and gifts and talents were. And that feels really like I want to honor them. I want to make them proud. I want to pay them back by doing a good job and by showing up and making it beautiful for them. And I do also want to feel that when it's my time to die, I am also current, so that I'm not leaving behind a debt for my child, or a gap or a deficit where they're trying to fill in the blanks, of like, where do I come from? What are my inheritances from my various lineages? What are some of the burdens or the challenges that I might need to? So it's not just like your medical record. That's really important and good to have if you can have it. But it's the other record too that actually plays a very direct role in what our medical records even are. Like I want to have as complete a family record for my child as possible. And even if I didn't have a child, that would feel, again, kind of morally right for me to feel that I had as complete a record as possible, of course, through my bias lens. But yeah, so my ancestral veneration practice is also my collapse practice, is also my parenting practice, is also my food practice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all related. Yeah, you've really brought us to our final question really beautifully. So thank you for that. And before I ask it, I just want to say one thing about those lovely nettles of yours. I know Ruben has been working on, his pizza dough. Have y'all ever put the nettles on a pizza?
Gosh, I don't think we have, and I don't know why we haven't.
Yes, I highly recommend it. I haven't done it myself yet. I'm also working on my pizza dough. But I've had a nettle pizza at a restaurant years ago. And I mean, I'm still talking about it. It was so delicious. Please do it and let us know about it.
Oh my gosh, I'm on it. Thank you for that. I don't know why we never thought of that. Pizza is like one of our 15 things we eat.
That's right. Same. And so now for our final question, Carmen, knowing that we carry our grief in tandem with carrying our joy and our love, what is your life recipe for tending grief?
I think my life recipe for tending grief would be similar to a bread recipe. And in our house, it's lazy sourdough and, no knead style. So I'm not a person, I don't think I have to feed my grief. I can find it everywhere. And I'm okay with that. Like my grief is ever present. And if at any time I need some release, all I have to do is give it a little bit of attention and it bubbles right up. So it's like, I just need that cold starter, a tiny little bit of flour, get it going, and it's going to rise. And then I just give it like time and space. And, there's that show now on TV with Harrison Ford shrinking, and he's a psychologist who gives the advice, just set a timer for 15 minutes, play the saddest song you can think of, let all your grief come out, and then when it's over, you just stop. And honestly, I am like that. Mm-hmm. I feel like once I spent a couple of years having monthly vigils for grief, and even though I'm back on the monthly now, but I sort of went to seasonally for about a year in the Numinous Network. What I found, though, was that my grief could be left alone most of the time, and it would be settled. It would be okay. It wasn't popping up and interrupting me. I didn't need to tend to it like you see those sourdough kind of things where it's like, oh yeah, you got to set a time, you got to be on it all the time. I don't have a high need grief. My grief is always there, and if it knows when it's going to be its time, it's going to come on. It's going to perform. What I noticed is that my grief started to just migrate. They left my marriage. They kind of left my parenting. They left my everyday. They left my, rainy mornings. And my grief just started to migrate to that one day a month when I would hold grief vigil. Mm-hmm. And, it was like always there, but just kind of like settled and chill. And then I sit down to the vigil. I think, I'm not really feeling my grief, but I'd open the space and bam, the tears would come, floodgates would open, I'd fall. And after a few minutes, it would just dry up. It would just kind of stop. And then I'd, maybe sit there quietly and, blot my tears. And then it would have another wave. And then when I got to the end and it was like, and scene, it would just stop. And it took a couple of years of learning what my grief practice was and just kind of honing it. Mine is very simple. It's, even if I wasn't hosting a vigil, I would do the same thing. I would just put on a playlist about 20 minutes long. I take out a foolscap piece of paper. At the top of it, I write things I am grieving now. And I'll tell you, for over a year, I go, number one, my mother. It was just predictable. That just came up every time. And I totally remember, probably month 13 or something of a monthly vigil. It wasn't my mother. It was something else. And that was oh, that's interesting. And over time, that grief it kind of just transformed into, I don't know, some deeper levels of compassion and other things came up. But that's all I do is I write a list, one and let it go. What are the things I'm grieving now? And I just write them down and I cry for as long as I want for each one. And then at the end of the playlist, that's it. I do a little somatic practice. I shake it off. And after some practice, grief is a practice. It's a thing I do. It's a process. You call it a ritual or an exercise. But what I found is that it then just did start to kind of take care of itself. And my grief feels a lot less urgent, overwhelming, needful, pressing. It really does feel like just another member of my committee. It's there, but it's another relationship. I just tend it, and if something comes up between vigils or between exercises, it knows I'm going to pay attention, and I know that it's not going to, totally suck me under. So I think having a practice of grief where you give it some space and you do a thing and you acknowledge deeply, and that combined with some death literacy and ability to let things end, those two things combined have really taken care of grief. And I don't need to tend to it. It's not fussy anymore.
Thank you so much for sharing that, for your time, your stories. I really appreciate you, Carmen. Thank you.
I appreciate you too, Andrea. And I am so excited you're doing this podcast. I can't wait to hear all the stories. I love Recipes for Grief. This is such brilliance, and you're so brilliant. I'm so glad you're sharing it with the world. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Recipes for Grief. You can find more information about today's guest on the podcast page of your player, as well as their recipe card that's available on my website, AndreaSextonDumas.com. That's AndreaSexton, D as in donut, UMAS.com. If you'd like to share your recipe for grief, leave a 3-minute voicemail at the following number, and your message may be played on a future episode as a listener shout out. That number is 510-426-6041. That's 510-426-6041. Find me on Instagram and TikTok at Recipes for Grief. And now, here's a little advice from my grandmother.
Life isn't easy. You just have to make the best of it.